Hello, welcome back. Good to see you all again, my favorite coder cats and coder kittens. This is Becca, often going by Netcat or Netcat's Meow most places online, and welcome back for another week discussing Linden scripting language. Again, I apologize for the very incomplete video last week. As I mentioned in there, I was having a sort of a string of things going on from a basement that had decided to be less of a storage area and more of an experiment in hosting a suburban underground aquarium, to the time crunch of dealing with a trip out to see a friend of mine on the far end of a neighboring state, um, and then having a hard time getting the actual color shift code to work the way I wanted it to. So this week I have corrected all of that. The only real the basement is being dealt with by professionals. Don't anybody worry. Um, the biggest difference between how I'm going to present this and how I usually do is that this time it's not going to be entirely off the cuff because the code is already written. But I will do a thorough breakdown of how it works, why, and why certain decisions were made. So, the first thing I'm actually going to show you all this time is right up here. This little thing is just a variation on the original pulsing color shifting orb that I was working on. This was meant as a way to help me play around with things and make sure they were all working correctly, where I could more easily see all of the parts I was working with. It's set to function on a click, where you can see this color changed, as did this, and this one is slowly fading to change to match that. That's a little more of a dramatic alteration. You're also getting this feedback here that I'll explain in just a minute. Alright. This started as just a copy of the other, so it has pretty much all of the same base parts. I just made a few variations to work with this idea. You'll notice the main thing I added was a float CXCYCZ. I will explain what these are in just a couple of moments. This part is the same as it was in last week's, where I showed off random color selection. And that is simply calling the result of choose to fill in each of the 3 slots in a vector. As I explained before, you could easily copy frand 1 into each of these slots and it would work just fine. The only reason I separated it is because if you actually go into trying to study this seriously, you will be reminded time and again that each function should do exactly one thing, and that they should be very isolated. In this case, it's simple enough, it wouldn't make a difference, but it's still good practice for writing code. Because if you're dealing with something larger in a proper object-oriented language, it might not be quite this simple to get the variations you're looking for. You may want to at some point attach to a class created somewhere else that will give you a better randomization or skew it in particular ways that you want. In which case, instead of having to change it 3 different times here, or however many times you might call this in a much larger, more complicated program, you would just change it right here and it would automatically be okay everywhere else. Now here is where we get into the meat of what this particular one does. Difference. It receives a vector A and a vector B, and I'll actually cut down here to show you what those are. When I click it, it defines color 2 according to color, that randomized call that I was showing you a moment ago. It sets link 2's color, which is right there, to match the new color. It sets link 1's color up here to whatever the previous color had been. You see that takes on that green shade that we had before. Let's see if we can find one that's a little more varied. There we go. Now this one's going to work much better. say I took on the pinkish tone from down here. Then it runs a difference on the old color and the new color. When that function has finished, it will come back down here and run the last line, which changes color 1, which is the starter color, to be the same as color 2. That's preparation for the next cycle. This way, the next time it runs through, the start color will be the old end color. So back up here in the difference, that explains where you're getting vector A and B from, is they're coming from color 1 and 2 down here. This is actually considered 3 separate lines of code. I layered them on top of each other because in this case I think that actually makes it a little bit easier to read, because they're essentially doing more or less the same thing. You're creating a float called AX, which equals A dot X. What that means is you take the X coordinate from the vector named A, which is why it's also named AX. Then do the same thing for the Y and the Z. So since colors are treated as a vector with an X, Y, and Z coordinate, X is red, Y is green, Z is blue. So I'm just separating the red, green, and blue, or the X, Y, and Z values, into separate variables that are contained inside the difference function. So I do that for both A and B. Then I create a new set, the dx, dy, and dz. What that is for difference. I take the starter one and I subtract the new one. So I get the difference between each of those, which is then when it says owner say x is string dx, y string dy, z string dz. That means I want to see what it charted as the difference between each of the numbers there. I combine them into a simple vector of my own called test. The ax minus dx, ay minus dy, and az minus dz. So what I'm doing is, well, what is the end result when you take ax and subtract dx? That shows me this right here. This is the color that you're targeting, the color you're supposed to create at the end. Since this is the last one, you can see that's pretty close to white, which bears out what you're looking at here. It's very close to white. The reason I did that is in this test bed, it let me go through and see, would these numbers be valid vectors? Would each of these numbers be between 0 and 1? These can be negative, that's fine. These represent the difference between them. But the actual vector that's meant to become a color has to be between 0 and 1 in each of its 3 points. Then I just simply establish the integer I because I'm going to... So this was a very good test box. That carried me over to here. You see it currently implementing its glow. And when that cycles through, you'll actually see it shift its color as well. It may take a moment to do that because I put an actual pause in the color shift. Oh, it actually is. It's shifting to a bluer. You can see it in the color right there, and that is bluer than when it started out. So this shows you right here, they are both running concurrently in the same object. And it's shifting to a more purple. You can actually see the result here somewhat, but you can see it a little more obviously there, what it's actually turning into. And as the fade goes down, there you go. Coming back up. So once I had something working, I mostly just imported the code into here, and you'll actually see the difference rather plainly when I get into looking at that. So whereas I had the X, Y, and Z contained in the other one, there it's shifted to a more purple. I think I can stop showing that. I think I've demonstrated well enough that that is in fact working. Put that in a place you should be able to see it. That ought to do it. But because they weren't going to be staying in one function, because I needed to have them be part of the loop. Sorry about that. I ran into a bit of a problem where the recording cut off. It kind of a side effect of how I have my rig set up. It's so that I'm not recording on the same hard drive Second Life runs on. I have it on the same, I'm recording into the same drive that I back up my file server to. Unfortunately, Fraps is not gentle on file size, and that was starting to catch up to me. So I'll explain all of that in more detail later. But, as I was saying that, whereas what you saw in the other one, I had the X, Y, and Z within the function, these had to function globally, so I put them up here. You'll understand why in a minute. This started as just a copy and paste of the original difference function. You see, all of those calculations are the same. I commented out the feedbacks here. This 2 forward slashes makes a comment. This is useful for leaving notes in code or for turning off a chunk of code without actually deleting it, like if you may want to go back through and make it function again later. You can actually do that. Then here, instead of declaring them, float x equals difference x divided by frames, I just simply put x because they're declared up here in global. I also added a color flip and color phase that I will explain in just a moment. So when you come down through here in the timer, none of the changes in here are really important. They just made it an easier startup. In the timer, all this for the glow is the same. Frame count is one of the things that's changed. I had to create not just frames here, but frame count. So if frame count is equal to or greater than frames, then it runs this chunk of code, which automatically resets the frame count to 0. If it's set for color flip, it will turn off the flag for color flip. It will select a new color 2. It will run the difference and then change color 1 to color 2. That is okay to do it this way because, again, this resets color 1 for the next cycle, but I don't have to feed color 1 back in exactly the same way. It's fed into the difference calculator here. Of course, it will have already been reset to whatever the new color was after that's done, so it'll be ready for the next cycle. And I will show you how those cycles work in just a little bit further down. If color flip was not set, then it does set to true. What that does is it means that it will stay on a color for a full cycle. It will do the cycle, and then it will stay on that color for a cycle, because I thought that the constantly pulsing color just didn't give you a chance to appreciate the differences in amongst the constantly pulsing glow. So I set that to have a bit of a delay in there. That was an aesthetic choice. You don't have to put that in there. You can completely remove any of that concern, in which case if frame count is equal to or greater to frames, then you would just put that chunk of code in there under the frame count equals 0 and not worry about the if, color flip, all the rest of that. If it does not equal to or greater to frames, then you deal with this section. If color phase, which is another delay so that it kind of slows it down just a touch, if it's on a color phase, it will increment the frame count, which is the one that counts down the number of frames until we're ready to decide if we're changing the color. Color phase will turn to false. Like I say, this staggers it, so it will only actually increment the color every other frame, or every other tick of the timer. And then color now, same as before, You take the x coordinate, you subtract the x, which was the difference between the two divided by the number of frames, and then you set the color to the new color now. And if it is not the color phase, you make sure the next one is the color phase. That's pretty much the same thing we had before, and it just plugs nicely into the timer. With the delays, I think it gives a nicely aesthetic pacing to everything. So, that actually shows you how to go through, set the entire thing that was requested. Yay. I will actually go through next week and show how to incorporate light into this so that it will actually give off an amount of light in the correct color to whatever it's set for. It will give off that light as it pulses. So it would be a good way to look into dealing with variable light under the control of scripts. I believe I've dealt with light once. I wouldn't mind going through and dealing with it in a little more detail. But that will go ahead and take care of y'all for this week. I will hopefully have the drive situation rethought next week. To explain that in a little more detail for anybody that's choosing to stick around, I have a lot of hard drives on my computer. I have the two system drives are in RAID 0, so they mirror each other so that I'm not at much risk of catastrophic data loss. I have a separate drive for my gaming stuff, like my Steam and my Origin. I have another hard drive that is a 3 terabyte that is a backup for my file server. And the more stuff I pile into the file server, I used to have enough extra room to record a long video through Fraps, but I must be starting to run a little bit out of room there. But I don't want to risk losing the contents of my file server, so I'm going to keep doing that. So I record to one of those other drives. I think I could have more control over the space on my game drive, so I may just leave 10 gigabytes available for Fraps on there. Because Fraps, which is the program I use to record these videos, it records uncompressed video, which is at a high resolution. So it is very memory intensive. In fact, when I go through and prepare these videos, one of the first things I do is I take everything and then I re-render it into a much smaller file size just because it's so much easier to work with that way. But that is, I guess, it for this week. I really appreciate the patience y'all had with me from last week. So videos should be up every Tuesday by noon, barring special circumstance. And so if it's Tuesday, we're talking Linden scripting language. So please like, comment, subscribe, share with your friends, join our Discord. Link, as usual, will be in the description. And until next week, good day, good luck, happy coding, meow. Oh, also, one other announcement. I'm hoping to soon be starting another regular series on this channel. I've been kind of toying with the idea for a long time. I think I'm finally ready to actually make it real. It would be a weekly recap of interesting things in science, video games, technology, movies, all of that. Just a quick recap of important things from the week on all sorts of nerdy, geeky, fun topics. I am planning to create a series, the Weekly Nerd News. So, anybody that finds that idea particularly cool, be sure to mention it in the Discord. This week has been is still dealing with the stuff from the basement, so I'll probably be starting it next week, unless I get really ambitious this week. So, I hope to see some of you over there. And again, good day, good luck, happy coding. This is the Nightcat, signing out.